So what we've got here is typical paradigm you've all probably heard of, which is the fight, flight, freeze kind of thing. So people normally they talk about fight and flight, but freeze is actually a pretty significant component with dealing with stress. And normally cortisol gets demonized as this terrible byproduct, but it's one of the things that would actually help us to fight or fly. The real problem is the freeze in modern sedentary populations, that we don't actually get to deal with the situation in the way we might in nature. And this is one of the reasons why we get these issues with stress. And this is one of the reasons why things like recovery are extra important, because we're putting extra stress into the system all the time, sometimes in quite unnatural ways. So I think whatever level you're at, recovery is a really important thing that you want to take care of in a cool down. And so it's moving a little bit slowly. I'm trying to change the slides, but if you're dealing with youth level, I've found that you want to get them to here. So youth level, they'll come, they'll turn up, they'll run around, they'll go crazy, and then you want to send them home closer to this. You don't want to hand them over to their parents hyped up. You want to bring them down to this kind of level. If you're dealing with elites and you're working them to something approaching intensity or whatever you consider to be intense, you're going to want to train them again at that sort of level of intensity, probably sooner rather than later. So you want them recovering as soon as possible. So again, this is what we're trying to bring them down to. And if you're dealing with people who are weekend warriors, they're not like serious competitive athletes, they're probably a little bit older, they have like job, they have families, they're also probably quite stressed. They've probably got all sorts of environmental factors that are stressing them out. And they might find that although they get a sense of release when they're participating in their sport, in a very real way, in terms of what's happening in their joints, in terms of what's happening on an endocrinal level, they're probably quite stressed out by the sport they do too, even though it doesn't come across that way emotionally. So I think with a cool down, you really want to bring everyone down to this kind of level. You really want to be the bear in some shape or form. So again, this is moving slowly. So you just feel free to like chip in if you've got any questions. I might turn my video off actually. No, here we are. So I don't know if you can read that because your thumbnail might be in the way, but it's a CNS hack. And so I'm a big believer in the whole like proximal distal kind of thought process with things like therapy. You know, if someone has a problem with an ankle, look at a bigger joint. You might find that it's not something happening at the foot and ankle complex. If someone has a problem with the elbow, you know, you might find that you go to the thoracic spine or the shoulder, that's where the root of the issue often is. So if you can find something bigger, you often might be able to sort smaller problems. Whereas if you go directly to the smaller symptom, it's often just a quick fix and all the rest of it. And so the question is, can you do something to the central nervous system? Can you actually do things to affect the nervous system? And so the answer is you can. There's a few things that we can do. And a lot of research has gone now into things like the difference between the sort of the processes involved under the nervous system from a parasympathetic and a sympathetic point of view. And the idea with most recovery modalities is you're trying to get people more parasympathetic. And we know we can have some positive effect on that. We know the vagus nerve is the kind of the delivery system for a lot of those parasympathetic operating systems. We know we can affect that. And the other thing, this is very powerful, when I found out about this, was we think about a lot of systems in the body as being voluntary or involuntary, but breathing is one of those ones that's both. You can stop yourself breathing, you can slow your breathing down, but if you don't think about breathing at all, you'll just breathe. And so because you have that control over your breath, you can actually have some sort of influence on all of the processes that are actually tied to the respiratory system. So breathing is obviously linked to blood flow. And if you can control your breath, then you can actually have some sort of positive control on what's going on with your circulatory system. It might be a small influence, but it is something that you can control. And if you want to really, the idea with this cool down is I'm trying to put those two things together. if anyone's seen that the stretch in the LinkedIn, in the Instagram, feel free to have a look at that while I'm talking. So we've got two systems here. So I like to think of a simple way of thinking of the nervous system as being your electrical system. And I think if you think of your endocrinal system as being your chemical system. And if you can control those to some extent, you're going to have positive control on a lot of other things that you have in your body. And so I've thrown out those terms like parasympathetic, endocrinal, and things like that. But if not everyone here studies things like physiology, and you do things where you're with computers or you have other like practical skill sets, I find sometimes it's helpful for people to think of this as your electrical system and your chemical system. And this is the idea, is we're trying to get some sort of vestige of control over those two things. So this is really where I came across Nikos. So I came across Nikos through talking to Roger White. I was asking him about recovery modalities. I asked him what he thought was a good thing to do with cooldowns. And he put me in touch with Nikos. And the prevailing sort of wisdom with cooldowns before I spoke to Nikos was that you do your light aerobic activity and then you do your static stretching. And Nikos raised the point that you have neural and muscular fatigue after you've finished exercise, especially if it's like robust exercise. And so is this the best time to be doing static stretching, let alone aggressive static stretching? And so, you know, my understanding of this, and this is what I was taught, and this is what most other coaches would have you believe, is that the purpose of the aerobic activity is that elimination of substrates, the sort of byproducts that will break down when you exercise hard. And the idea of stretching is you're trying to return a muscle to its resting length, to its initial length, so it can recover. I'm not really gonna go into the stretching today. I think Nikos, you know, he can cover any of that anyway, except to say that I don't really use any kind of normal static stretching in my cooldowns anymore. After talking to Nikos, I just kind of think there's a few reasons, but one of the biggest reasons for today is it's not going to help people get parasympathetic. And I don't think it's really going to fix much. So I've kind of moved on from there. So I'm going to talk about some other things that I do on top of using micro stretching and why I use them. Here we go. So can everyone read this?
Yeah.
I've tried to fit it in so that you can have your videos in the right hand corner and should still be able to read it.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is just a kind of guideline about how I'd approach some of this stuff. Now, I've worked with teams where you won't even get them to do a cool down, and I'm not even going to bother. And then you'll work with other people who, you know, they always want more. They always want more help. They're always going to do the extra miles. That you know, and you might be able to layer a cool down. You might be able to get loads of things in. But I find that if you're working with teams, just, you know, there's no point in trying to introduce too many things at one time. So I've tried to introduce these things in stages as I've gone along. As the squad gets used to them, as the individuals get used to them, you might get like the guys who, you know, are a little bit more mature do it, and then some of the others copy them later on. Or, you know, you might find that the guys who are the best players in the team sabotage it by saying it's nonsense, and it's almost not a point. So these are just principles of ways you might try and add stuff in. So cool down 1, this might be the first week, it might be the first month, depending on how much you can improve the quality of your cool down and how much you can teach. But just imagine that over time I'm trying to increase variables. So the first cool down 1, maybe this is just aerobic flush, and maybe I might do some light stretching with them. And what I do, I put learn two-way street. And the reason why that is because that you really, if you want to do any kind of stretching properly, you have to teach people how to do the stretches. So like I've seen people who, like, you give them a hip flexor stretch and all they're doing is they're just going into greater and greater and greater anterior pelvic tilts, and they think they're getting huge movement and they're not doing anything to the muscle. And a lot of coaches will resist trying to get you to teach the stretches properly, in my experience, because they don't actually understand the anatomy themselves and they don't think it's worthwhile. But if you're going to do stretching, you have to teach it. So that's why you've got to start off with this learning phase. And the other thing I think is a two-way street. So I will still use stretching a lot of the time, not because I'm trying to fix anything. I'm using it as a diagnostic tool. So you see who gets uncomfortable with certain stretches, who can't do certain stretches, who is very sensitive in certain stretches. You start to figure out what they actually need. You can get clues from how they're put together as an athlete. The guys who are getting like, very sensitive adductor magnus, that gives you clues about what might be happening with their glute max, glute med. It gives you clues about how they might get injured later on. The guys who they go bananas when you try and give them a rec fem stretch, they might, not have the same sort of issues with a psoas stretch. And you start to get clues about who's going to likely get a back injury if you don't leave those things alone, and how you might structure their strength and conditioning program. So I think it's an excellent diagnostic tool to get people to do a little stretching. And that's what I'd be doing in my first phase. I'd be like, give them some basic stretches, see how they do, start teaching them how to do them properly, but also learn from them, see how their bodies are responding in the stretch and how you should probably be going forward and training them. So then you get into second cool down. And now if you're doing stretches with them, you can be a bit selective. You can give them a little bit of a hierarchy. They can learn about their bodies, and they kind of know what their favorite ones are, or the ones they need the most. So it's a way of giving them that autonomy where they can select things themselves. But at the same time, they're not going to do the ones that are a complete waste of time unless they're being really lazy.
So Tom, what's the time frame? So you said cool down 1. Is this all within the same day, or is this cool down 1 for 1 month and cool down 2 for the second month? I'm trying to picture the time frame here.
So look, I haven't put a time frame because it will depend, but the idea is, that I should explain that more clearly though. The idea is that over time, I'm trying to get more out of this cool down. So I might start off cool down 1 might be January, cool down 2 might be February. Cool down 3 might be March, and the season might be over before we get to cool down 3, because it would depend how the head coach responds to it. It will depend how the team respond to it. It depends whether even they're going to stay for a cool down, depending on what level you're at. You might get people who are very switched on and responsive, and cool down 1 might be week 1, cool down 2 might be week 2. So it's just over time, you're trying to inject more useful elements in. You're trying to get each thing you're doing, you're trying to get better. If you're doing stretching.
The other question I have is with regards to the aerobic flush. What are you using? Light running, cycling? And then after that, you're saying you're introducing stretching from a diagnostic point of view. What's the time frame after the aerobic flush that you introduce the stretching?
So you're probably going to find at most levels you have quite a short time frame.
Okay.
So unless there's some reason, like you're dealing with people who are heavily using their legs, and you might have some sort of reason to use their arms, I'd probably do a light run.
Okay.
And I would introduce the stretching, if I was going to do it, pretty soon after, because of the time frame.
Okay.
Now I know it's non-ideal in like a micro stretching point of view, and you really want that before sleep, and you really want that in a separate section. But this is more for you've got a maximum of 15 minutes.
50, 50 or 15?
No, 15. That's the most I've ever been given with a team to do as a cool down is 15 minutes, just in my experience. And so you might get 5 minutes. You might get less than that, or you might get the opportunity to get them to do things autonomously.
Okay.
So you manage to teach them something and say, now next month, you're going to get them to do that part at home.
So are you saying that you do the regular stretching after the aerobic flush for 15 minutes, and then at night you would do the micro stretching?
No, I'm saying, but you could do that. But if you were going to do that, I wouldn't do the stretching.
Which stretching?
If you were going to do micro stretching in a separate session after you got home, I wouldn't do stretching.
Okay, so if you're going to do, for example, if I had a workout in the morning and then at 9 and I finish at 11, and then I plan to do micro stretching at night before going to bed, then I shouldn't do the regular stretching.
It's not that you
after the
shouldn't.
workout.
It's not that you shouldn't do it. I just think that if you're going to be doing the stretching anyway, later on, good to remember the focus on this isn't on mobility. So I'm not saying do these stretches from a mobility point of view. I think the mobility things are happening from a neurological point of view or a joint aberration point of view. And I think what will happen is there's better ways of fixing that.
So the other thing, sorry, Tom.
No, go on.
The other thing I'm going to add in support to what Tom's saying too is after the aerobic flush, the most important thing that you have to keep in mind is muscle glycogen and muscle glucose and the glycogen in the nervous system, and that has to get replenished. If you actually start doing any type of regular stretching post activity and you have some fatigue both in the neural and in the muscle area, the tendency for you is to overstretch, which is what you don't want to do. And I think what Tom is trying to get across is he's not focused on the mobility stuff. He's basically trying to get the body ready to the state where you can become the polar bear. So the parasympathetic system is what he's more geared towards. Is that correct, Tom?
No, totally. I kind of didn't want to go into the micro stretching thing just because there's people on here who are experts in that. So I kind of wanted to talk about other stuff, but just the idea is that these stretches would be no more than 30% intensity and just a minute, and then you're swapping into your next stretch, right? So this is very low intensity, non-aggressive stretching because we're trying to get people more parasympathetic. That's the idea.
Trying to cause damage, which is important.
Yeah, and you're trying to avoid that trauma that they've already put their body through.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Sorry. So the third phase of the cool down. So this is where I'd introduce something to go with the aerobic flush. And I think just to help you, envisage the aerobic flush as being a light jog. This is just a light jog. And now this is an opportunity where you can get more out of your cool down from a motor learning perspective. Now, they've just done their session, they've just done their match practice, whatever it is. And the skills that you've been getting them to practice have been hopefully implicit in that. You've probably been briefing them, you've probably been giving cues on them, you've probably been giving feedback on them. Now, this is an opportunity where you get maybe a 2-minute jog, a 3-minute jog. I mean, you're not talking a lot of time. This is an opportunity to get them to focus on some sort of technical, tactical, voluntary aspect of what they've been doing. So for instance, like I know we've got some sprint coaches here. So if I'm training sprinters, I've used a lot of that forebrain, hindbrain model, where there's things I don't want them to think about and maybe things I do want them to think about. So this might be an opportunity where you get them to think about some of those voluntary things. You say, well, what were you focusing on today? How did it feel? And you're just trying to reinforce some of the senses of that session, what their key values of that session were. If you're working with a team, it might be a tactical thing. It might be, who are we playing on Saturday or who are we playing on Wednesday? What did we actually focus on today? And this can be done in the jog by the captain. It could be done by the strength and conditioning coach. It could be done by the coach, because it's got to be simple information. It's got to be no more than 3 points of information, simple stuff that you can just have a little chat about. And it's a productive use of time. It's right there, right after the session's finished. And it's the best time to find out, like, did they actually understand? Or if they did understand, let's try and ingrain it now. Let's try and ingrain a sense of culture, or let's try and burn in that sense of this is what we were trying to practice and why. So for me, that would be a way you can get more out of that aerobic flush. And I've given them 2 sessions or 2 weeks or however long it took to just get them used to doing that before I introduced that focus. And again, it's not taking any time out of your training. It's just trying to combine things that work well together. So the fourth stage, this is where I'd introduce parasympathetic breathing. So, and you could do these in different orders. You guys, you know your teams, you know your squads, you know your athletes. So you could do them in the orders where you think they're going to have buy-in, that they have the mindset where they're actually going to value this stuff, or you can do it in the orders where you think, well, actually, what's most important. These guys, they're 14. I'm not really worried about them dealing with stress as much. So maybe they're not going to talk about, maybe they're not going to focus on the breathing. Maybe they're just going to hold each other's hands and laugh and giggle. So maybe I'm just going to focus on this technical, tactical, voluntary stuff. You know, I'm going to get my sprinters thinking about their starts. I'm going to get my throwers thinking about their throws, you know, whatever it is you want them to think about. So pick and choose these things that work for you. Because I've had teams that these things don't work with, and I've had coaches with these things that they don't work. They don't let you do them. They don't let you try them. So it's going to be about the mindset that you're dealing with. So just briefly, parasympathetic breathing. All you're doing is you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. And if you look at that stretch that I put out on Instagram, so that's actually one that I've used to great effect with a lot of people. And it's just, it's great for SI joints. It's great for people who are stressed and spend a lot of time sitting. You follow those parameters that Nikos talks about, 30% intensity, 1 minute, swap legs. It does you a lot of favors if you've got any kind of knee and back problems. But it's something that you can actually combine with parasympathetic breathing. So all it is if you've got that image up, do you want me to put it up, or has everyone got it up?
Sure, go for it, Tom.
See if I can put it up.
Yeah.
Might be a bit slow if I do it. But actually it'll take me too long because I've closed that thing down. But
no, I've lost you guys. Oh, there you guys are. Give me a chalkboard and the chalk.
But that stretch, you're basically just lying on your back with one foot up against the wall, shin across your knee, and it's getting into you call that the piriformis stretch, don't you, Nikos?
It's the glute piriformis stretch. It's actually there. Richie gave out the IAAF article that I wrote on microstretching, and the stretch is in there. It's stretch number 3 in the booklet in the back. Yes.
And I've had great success with that. People who aren't athletes, they're just people who are in pain, have injuries, and they're too stressed to train. You do that with them, you calm them down, and they get up feeling better, they move better, and it gets actually into better movement. And
it's bringing in a lot more fascia. It's bringing the thoracolumbar fascia in, which is very important as well, which will actually help calm the upper body, which is good.
So I just put a link to where that article is in the other chats we've had.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
So with that one, so I found that once someone understands, like, you know, I do this for a minute, they understand what 30% is, what you can actually get them doing is doing their diaphragmatic breathing at the same time. It's very simple. So all you're doing is you're putting your hand on your belly and you're breathing in through your nose so that the rib cage doesn't rise, but the stomach does. And what's actually happening when you do that is the diaphragm is actually compressing the contents of the abdomen. So the diaphragm is actually dropping down, but people won't understand it like that unless they've studied a little bit of anatomy. And so I find if you just tell people you're breathing the air into your stomach through your nose, which of course isn't happening, but it's a good way for them to visualize that. If you tell them, though, you're trying to compress your viscera with your diaphragm, they're going to lose you. But if you just say you're breathing in through your nose and you're just trying to fill the stomach up with your air, keep your chest still, that should get them into a decent diaphragmatic rhythm. And then what you do is really crucial for diaphragmatic breathing. If you're trying to get a parasympathetic response, is do like a long 8 second, 6 second, just a long exhale through the mouth. And that helps you expel more carbon dioxide. So if you can just visualize that stretch, they're in a relaxed position, they're around 30%, they're calm, they've got their hand on their stomach, they're breathing in through the nose, nice inhale through the nose, the stomach is actually distending because the diaphragm is dropping, and then when they exhale nice and slowly through the mouth, and something like 8 seconds, 6 seconds. It's just going to help you basically get control of your blood flow, but also by that mechanism of the diaphragm moving, you're actually going to go more parasympathetic. So it's something that takes no time at all, doesn't actually have to take away from some of the stretches, but I find that's the easiest one to combine it with. And I find that's a very productive stretch. Like most people, you know, they have some sort of need for that stretch. So now I'm going to get into the next phase. If there are any questions about the parasympathetic breathing, though, you just chip in at any time. So this is now about the autogenic training. So I read about this book in 2014. I was reading some stuff on powerlifting, and I think it was Marty Gallagher, who's like a former USA powerlifting team coach. He mentioned this book, and he mentioned this book as a great psychological book for preparation for his lifters and all the rest of it. So I thought, I want to get a copy of that. I looked it up on Amazon, and it was like something like £50 or something like that. And I thought I might wait until I can come up with a cheaper copy, because I wasn't flush for cash really at the time. So I waited, and then I came across it eventually. I got a copy of it probably, I think, 4 years later. And at the time, I'd been studying a martial art in Hong Kong, and I'd actually moved to Hong Kong to study this martial art. And I was blown away by what they could do with this martial art. So that's the only reason I'd moved to Hong Kong, just to study this. And I opened the book and I started reading it, and it was all stuff that they were doing in my martial art.
What martial art was it, Tom?
Oh, it was, I mean, they'd call it Wing Chun, but it's not like any Wing Chun you've seen anywhere else in the world. They were doing something totally different. So you had like 60-year-old women throwing around like 20-year-old guys who are twice their size. They were doing stuff that they shouldn't really be able to do. But a lot of the things that they were doing to prepare themselves were actually the same things that were described in like the first few chapters of this book. So I was like, well, I know that works because I've seen it. I've actually seen it happen. I've actually had it done to me repeatedly. So I was, quite interested, been trying out some of the methods, the other methods. And then the guy who wrote this, so his background was, he was a Czech fencing coach, and he won quite a few medals as their sports psychologist. Yeah. And then he went over to the US, he defected, and I think he was working in tennis, but definitely swimming as a sports psychologist. And then he got success there. They won medals there as well. And I find that you'll get people who are successful in a sport, and it's often to do with their talent pool. It's got nothing to do with like what their methods are. Give me the Indian cricket team, and I could probably look like a very good strength and conditioning coach. Give me the Norwegian cricket team, and I think I don't think my reputation would be quite as good. You know what I mean? But because this guy had done fencing, and then it had transferred to tennis, and then it transferred to swimming, that sort of worked my interest. So what he did with a lot of his athletes was he did these things where he got them to, I can't remember if he called them scripts. I actually had to leave the book in Hong Kong, but I can't remember if he called them scripts or diaries or essays. But what it was he would get people to write down descriptions, reflective descriptions of their worst performances and their best performances. And he would get them to write down like things like, well, what was my breathing? How did my body feel? Did they feel hot? Did they feel heavy? Did they feel cold? Did they feel light? Did something feel easy? Did it feel hard? He got them to write down what they thought and said. What was their self-talk? So how are they describing the situation? How are they describing the tasks at hand and all the rest of it? And from doing that, he managed to get people to kind of come up with patterns of self-talk. This is like, a successful performance. This was a bad performance. This was my best performance. And they started to come up with commonalities, and then to try and sort of take a few steps back and try and retrace those steps and try and artificially create the kind of performance mindset and the performance environment in the actual game. So this would be my 5th cool down. After you've got selective about what light stretches you're using, you're getting that sort of technical, the aerobic flush, and you've got them doing some parasympathetic. This is actually what I'd combine it with, is some autogenic training. And so what that is really is, you start saying, don't finish on a negative, because remember, you're not trying to stress the people out more. The idea of a whole parasympathetic cooldown is you're trying to bring them back down, and you're trying to, send them home happy and send them home in a recovery mindset and a recovery state. So if you've got your athletes and you're like, give them like 5 minutes of parasympathetic breathing and stretching, and then you start shouting at them and saying, and you didn't have the right equipment, and you didn't turn up, and you haven't filled out your form, and you didn't pay, it just kind of defeats the purpose. So rather than finish on a negative, I'm having trouble getting this skipping ahead actually. Don't know why, stuck on this slide, but sorry, don't have the slide. It's you give them a positive. So I do this with a rugby team, for instance. I'd say, what was something you did well tonight? what was something that you executed really well? How did it feel? How did it look? How did you visualize your opponent? What did your body feel like? What were you telling yourself? What was your self-talk? And so, you know, in a throw context, you know, that could be one of the better throws. You know, that could be, how did they feel? How did they look? What did your feet feel like? What did your upper body feel like? In that sprinting, you know, you might be starts. You know, it might be something that you've seen that you actually want to implicitly coax them towards. Or it might be something where you can actually learn something from what they're struggling with and not. But it's just a perfect opportunity where you've got them, they're doing their piriformis stretch, they're breathing, they're calming themselves down, they've got their eyes closed, and you're just trying to get them to capture that moment.
What about visualization? Try to bring in some visualization too. I mean, it's a perfect
time to do that as well. But I think what you can do is you'll start to get ideas about who the visualization stuff helps and who it doesn't. But I mean, that if it's a visualization thing, I think the autogenic stuff I'm talking about at the end is probably a little bit more personal. Whereas if there's a visualization thing that would probably benefit like the squad, or it would probably benefit a technique that everyone has to do, you could maybe put that in the aerobic flush. You could maybe put that in the jog and you go, remember guys, you know, like whatever our picture is, however we describe that, like if you describe it as an animal or like an airplane or a train, you know, go, remember guys, that was really good when we had the trains taking off, or, you know, whatever it is. But if you've got an idea that some athlete performs better when they visualize something in a certain way, then you could do it at the end as well with the breathing. You just be like, what did you do well? How did it feel? How did you see it? And if that comes back to you, then you can try and like reinforce that to them. But that's pretty much, I don't know why it's stuck. Here we go. There we go. So this is what Cooldown 5 would look like. So you've got your little aerobic activity, and that's just an opportunity where you're saying like, what's my technical, tactical, voluntary focus? Don't pick. I wouldn't pick more than 2 things, 3 things max, and that's mirroring the focus of your session. That's mirroring the focus of what you want to improve on. That's mirroring what you've probably debriefed them on, what you've probably given feedback on. And it's just a time to reinforce it while it's fresh, while they've just done it. If you're going to do some sort of like parasympathetic stretching, and bear in mind, this would work if you're doing foam rolling, or if you're doing theragunning, or if you're doing ice bath, whatever it is, you can also have parasympathetic breathing going on at the same time. And then to some sort of element of autogenic training. I'm using that term. I think Kogler uses it a few times. People use that term differently. So, you know, the way I'm describing it is that thing where you're getting them to try and visualize something that they did well, and they're trying to recapture that moment, how it felt, how they spoke to themselves, what they breathed, whatever it is. And it will be different in your sports, and it will be different on the athlete. But it's an opportunity where you can get like a really productive professional cool down from a performance standpoint. You're cementing good habits, but what you're not doing is you're not expecting additional time. You know, you could probably do this in 5 minutes. And then finally, if I can just skip to, I don't know if it's working, but no, it's not working. Yeah, so I was working with one team, and the coaches said, you know, there's no time for, you know, there's no time for stretching and all the rest of it, because they wanted to do a debrief. And then I had another coach who did want to do stretching, thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And so you can come up with stretches that people can do. I know this isn't one of Nikos's, this isn't like a micro stretching one, but you can come up with stretches that you can actually debrief people at the same time.
Stretching has been used as a means of being able to sit down and have teamwork while people are doing group stretches. It's been done before, which is a good point.
So, I mean, so something like this, if I'm doing this with an athlete, like I'm maybe not going to spend like a minute timing them, but I'm going to eyeball it. I'm going to see who has poor hip internal rotation, and that's going to help me write a strength training program for them. That's also going to help me, like, advise on, like, what good prehab stuff is for them. But they're listening to the coach. They're listening to the coach. After about a minute, I tell them to swap. So you can have your cake and eat it with these things. You can have it both ways. It's just about investing the time to teaching your athletes to do the stretches properly, and investing your time as a coach to learn about why your athletes are responding to stretches a certain way. And then once they've learned those stretches, it won't change too much, because that's their environment and that's their anthropometry that is giving them the need for those stretches. How much they need them and the degree that they need them, that might change. But so you can get all this happening at the same time. You can get this happening at the same time, and it doesn't have to take any time out of your day. You just have to invest the time in teaching them and layering it up patiently. I better stop now because I think.
Oh, she's coming. I mean, I don't know what time it is. Where's Richie? Richie's disappeared. The thing that's very important too, guys, if you don't have a clock or a watch to count a minute, another thing that you can do is you use your breath, like as Tom alluded to. So if you take 6 deep diaphragmatic breaths, that's almost equivalent to about a minute. So that actually helps a lot of people to not only calm down from what Tom was mentioning too, but it also gives them an idea of an approximation of time with regards to how long they've been holding the stretch. Aerobic flush is very, very important. I mean, aerobic flush in 1994, myself and another person developed. I don't know if you guys are familiar with ice hockey and National Hockey League, but we actually came up with the idea of using bicycles as a way of creating the aerobic flush. So this is why now you're seeing a lot of athletes on the sideline riding their bikes, because the whole concept behind aerobic flush is to maximize the ability to remove the metabolites, specifically lactic acid. I mean, the body normally gets rid of lactic acid within 30 minutes to about an hour normally. So what aerobic flushing does is it just tries to expedite it, like what Tom alluded to, light jogging. And again, the most important thing is the breathing, as Tom mentioned. The other thing with autogenic training, when I was a young pup many centuries ago, we were taught autogenic training in a different way, where auto means self and genic, self-creating. So we were taught to, I don't know how many of us out there right now can relate to this, but create tension in your body and then let it go. Create tension in your body and let it go to try to relax the nervous system. Has anybody done that or experienced that?
Yeah, done it in the late 80s, early 90s when I was actually running.
Yeah.
It was kind of in fashion for a while and then disappeared. I think because the national bodies just stopped teaching it. So all the coaches coming through just didn't do it.
I think what the biggest issue was, as Tom alluded to with regards to a lot of training stuff, is time. It does take time to be able to go through the whole body and say, I want you to tighten your calves, relax them, tighten the calves, relax them, and then proceed up the body to try to create, as Tom has alluded to, the parasympathetic response, which is what we really want to do to stimulate proper recovery and regeneration. Any questions? Malcolm, come on now. Fire some questions. Okay, all right. Here, I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna prod you guys in there.
My head is bursting.
Okay, wait a sec. We've got iPhone here because that's all I see is iPhone.
Yes, that's me. So Tom was emphasizing being able to do the stretches properly, but what kind of cues, how do you find out what the athlete is supposed to improve on from doing the stretches that are prescribed through the micro stretching? If they can't get into the pigeons on the wall, pigeons pose on the wall.
So I think if you don't know what the stretch should really be doing, don't do it. And I find that like a lot of people, they'll see a stretch in a book and they'll just copy that. And they're not really thinking about like, well, what's the tissue that I'm actually trying to ease off? And it's, you know what, it's not actually trainers' faults, because there's actually a lot of misinformation about stretches. I mean, there's one that Nikos like talks about, which is the classic calf stretch, which is, he describes as actually being a tug of war between the calf and the hamstring. It's not really relaxing the calf. So I would recommend, if you want to do some productive stretches, is actually look at Nikos's article, which is on the IAF website, isn't it?
Yep.
I have read it actually.
those stretches are good. And I think, you know, I've done those with athletes, and I've just, you know, you just think about like, well, what are you actually trying to target? What's the muscle here that's actually causing the issue? And you'll see it in the movement, and they'll respond to it with feeling. But the thing is, with like, if you're doing it at 30%, you're not going to do any harm.
And the other thing which is very, very important, iPhone. What is your name, by the way? Ali. The other thing that's very, very important is when you place your body in the stretch. For instance, Tom mentioned the glute piriformis stretch up against the wall, where people are, you know, it's the stretch where you face the wall, you put your feet up on the wall, and then you cross your one leg over the other. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, and this, like, the way I look at stretching, and Tom alluded to, and I'm glad he did, is I use it as a diagnostic tool. So when you're doing that particular stretch where you're crossing your leg over, so in this case, let's say I'm crossing my right leg over my left knee, okay? And then after a minute, when I switch, and then I notice, wait a sec, when I cross my left leg over my right knee, my left glute is a lot tighter. That is a quick indication that the part that's tight is compensating for an injury still in the body. So the key is the athlete is imbalanced. So the fact that they're feeling the stretch, you're feeling a greater stretch on your left glute, is an indication that you still have a muscle imbalance, probably due to some previous injury. So when you look at the athlete doing the stretches, you can see when they move from one stretch to the other, and not just from let's say a glute stretch to a IT band stretch, but even the same stretch that's being done. Just look at their hips, how the hips shift. Look at how if the hip raises off the ground, there's a lot of tension in the lumbar area. If they cross their leg over, instead of the knee being straight across, it's somewhat closer to the body. That's an indication that the IT band is tight, that there's a hip flexor issue. You can ascertain a lot just by looking at how they place their body in that proper position when they're doing the stretching. The other thing that's very, very important, which is what I've emphasized all this time since 1995, when I've met Jimson and Tom as well. The thing that's very, very important is placing your body in a position where you're eliminating that contraction. Because when your body is relaxed, when your or like Tom alluded to, when your electrical system is relaxed, your neural system is relaxed, you get a better indication of how your muscles relate to one another, which is key.
In the events that I coach, the throws, you're almost deliberately creating an imbalance because of the way, you know, rotational throwers or glide shot, you're creating that imbalance. You're almost asking yourself, as opposed to be injured nearly.
You are. So this is where you have to take the time to basically, and guys, I want to say this as an aside. This is why I wanted to do this micro stretching live thing with Richie and myself. And I'm glad you guys, these are the questions that I'd like you guys to bring to the forefront, where we can actually look at them, analyze them, and try to find an answer. If I don't have an answer, that I'm sure there's somebody here that can basically come up with an answer. But the question is, yes, you are creating those muscle imbalances. So this is why it's very, very important that you take the time outside of the field to teach the athlete to do the stretches bilaterally, not just focus on the one side. You will notice that the side that has less tension, they won't feel anything. But the other side that's got the more tension, the side that is unbalanced because of the sport, is going to have more issues. Here's a classic one for you. They did archery. When they had young children and they were teaching them archery, and they're always pulling, let's say, the right side. What they noticed after a while is the development of scoliosis. So the muscles on the right side were getting tighter. They were pulling the spine to the right side. So this is why it's very important, which is what Tom's emphasizing, which is what I've emphasized for years, is you've got to basically then take this body that has been traumatized, because this is what you're doing. You're traumatizing the body. It's a catabolic effect. The body's breaking down. You have to supply the tools to build it up again. Anavalusis, which is the Greek word. And I don't mean recommending steroids, but the thing is, this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to, because when you're actually activating the parasympathetic nervous system, you are modulating and moderating the inflammation. There's inflammation in that body right now. You have to remove it, which is very important.
Sorry, can I ask when the live is?
Sorry?
Can I ask when the live is?
This is the live.
No, but you said the other live on micro stretching.
Oh, no, this is what I'm talking about. Micro. This is what we call the session here once a week. We call it. Sorry.
Okay. This is my first time, so sorry.
Oh, no problem. No, this is what we call it. I mean, we have the fortune today of having Tom present on his autogenic and his parasympathetic breathing, which is very, very important. Breathing is very important with regards to, like Tom also alluded to, the vagal nerve. The vagal nerve is a very, very important nerve because that stimulates the parasympathetic, and that gets stimulated through breathing.
Just with what you're saying about the throwing.
Yeah.
You'll find that proper sports are asymmetrical. And like the amount of, there's a sort of a prevailing wisdom in the fitness industry that if you're asymmetrical, you're dysfunctional, and this is terribly bad for you and all the rest of it. And the amount of people who I've worked with who are elite, or the amount of people who I know who've worked on elite people who say these people are terribly dysfunctional, and terribly imbalanced. Sometimes it's not about function if that's what's right for the sport. It's just about, it's on a continuum, and it will get to a point where it will lead to an injury. And the thing is, if you're dealing with a population like throwers, all we actually really need to do is come up with a needs analysis, or what are the tissues that typically get injured for them. Like I know with like some lifters I deal with, it's like typically it's like, it's the supraspinatus tendon or the patella tendon. And so what you do is, once you've got that sort of, these are the groups of things that are typically getting injured, then you do an injury mitigation strategy where you think like, well, how can I alleviate some of these issues? Yes, I want them to be imbalanced because that's actually how they're going to be a more efficient thrower. But bearing in mind, like if I've got a tent and one rope is shorter than the other, and I can't send off to the manufacturer to get a new rope, that's always going to be my rope. What's my strategy about, like, where can I put the peg some of the time? How can I leave the peg out of the ground some of the time? Maybe there's something I could do with the rope. And you can actually come up with strategies if you really hone in on what's the athlete, what's the event, and what are the tissues and what are their symptoms. And you can often, if you do the work, you can actually often come up with mitigation strategies, which mean they never have problems. They never get injured.
But the one most important thing is, as coaches and athletes, we look at a yearly training plan. I've often said that it's the time between the end of competition and the beginning of amortization phase, and then, you know, strength endurance. That what we call the 6 to 8 weeks time off. What's the name, Jimson? What do we call that? You know, the where the athlete is not training. Richie, help me with this. I'm forgetting the term. The transition zone, but it's called, yeah, the transition zone in between. That is the time when you need to really, really emphasize proper stretching and increasing range of motion and helping the tissue recover. The time off phase. It's another name because I wrote a whole article on this. I haven't published it yet. But the thing is, so you finished with your throwers, and now they're entering their transition phase from before they start you're starting to prep them for competition again. Those 6 to 8 weeks are vital to start looking at those imbalances that they've developed because of their sport. That's when you work on helping the body get back to normal. When I was working with baseball, the one thing, for instance, the throwers, often, so I'm going to show this as an analogy. So if we have throwers, at the end of the year, they have this much range of motion, okay? So they basically recover a bit. So by the time they start their new season, you know, from playing golf, relaxing and all this, they have this much range of motion, okay? But the issue is they've only increased the range of motion this much, and their bodies are still compensated and they've been traumatized through their whole season. So during the transition phase or the training phase, what you need to do is you've got to increase the range of motion to here. So when they've got all this range of motion to play with, naturally, as the season progresses, you can see that their ranges of motion are going to start diminishing because of muscle tightness, some injuries that that they've been exposed to, and you know, lack of sleep. The list can go on and on because the body's continuing to be traumatized, and you're taking away more, you know, you're taking away from its ability to properly recover, regenerate. So the transition phase is when you actually focus on increasing that range of motion. That's proper recovery, regeneration. So Peter, with your athletes, when they finish their throws or their throwing season, that's when you really got to focus on regenerative stuff, which is very, very important to get them ready. Because Tom's right. A thrower basically is used to throwing with the putting or with his right side. It's going to be difficult for you to get him to putt on with his left side, because ideally that's what you want them to do. You want them to be able to throw both right and left. I mean, obviously the dominant side being the right side in this case, but that's not logistics, because you're going to need another 14, 15 years to get that athlete to that phase. So the transition zone is when this is where you really need to focus on regenerative stretching and getting these people ready for their new season.
Cool.
Any other questions? Please unmute yourselves. Let's have a chat. What time is it, Richie? Richie's just chatting away.
5:07.
5:07? Okay. We got another 8 minutes.
I'm Carlton.
Yeah,
hi,
Carlton.
I have a question for Tom.
Sure.
Hi, Carlton.
When you do the deep breathing, and
What's that?
And Nico mentioned doing the breathing while you were doing your micro stretching or your stretching session, your 15 minutes after practice. Should you do continuous deep breathing, or is there a threshold at what point you keep continuing that it's not going to make any difference?
I think if you do it for more than a few minutes, people are just going to get bored anyway.
Okay.
And I think if you're dealing with dealing with young kids, that's going to be impossible. And actually, to be honest, I say that, but if you're coaching men, they usually behave like kids when you put them in a group anyway. So I think I would just say about a minute, to be honest. You just, and it's a good thing to finish on. it's a good thing to finish on. You know, you just give them about a minute, and there might be some things from there might be some research that says reasons why you wouldn't do it because of that extra elimination of CO2, but I think you'd have to do quite a lot of it for that to be a problem. Another thing I've done with it, I've done it as a kind of morning recharge thing. And then I've done it slightly differently, where you'll do about a minute of the breathing, and then you'll get them to finish and you make it a little bit of a competition. So they've got one hand on their diaphragm and the other hand is up. And when they do the last breath, you get them to take a really deep breath, still a diaphragmatic one. Mm-hmm. And then what you do is you get them to hold that breath for as long as they can. And the idea is it's actually strengthening the diaphragm muscle, but it's also giving them a bit of a competition. And they hold their hand up for as long as they can hold their breath. And then when they can no longer hold it, they put their hand down. And that long breath hold, it actually has some, I think it's a cannabidinol, but it has some sort of biochemical reaction where it gives you a natural high. So I actually do that sometimes with squads as a morning recharge thing. If you say you've got to go up 6 o'clock in the morning, run around the forest and then do something to sort of wake them up, I might do some joint mobility stuff. Then I'll do the breathing, and then I'll try and like give them something that's a bit fun to sort of wake them up before breakfast. If I'm doing it at the end of the session as a cool down, I won't do that. But I think it's got to be short and sharp, not so much from a kind of physiological point of view, but more like they're just going to get bored more than 2 minutes of that, I think, you know?
Yeah.
And Richie, I was just going to say, Richie's had experience with his young athletes when as like a sort of cool down. We were talking about it yesterday. So come on, Mr. Galveston.
Yeah. So sorry, I had to prep somebody on free lap training while we were doing stuff here. I can have up to 60 high school boys. And again, as Tom said, the misnomer, they're like, 13 to 17, and we'll do our workouts in the morning because it's 95 degrees and 90% humidity until early October and mid-October here. So we do mornings. They're great. They go home after school. They get sleep early. They do micro stretching. The ones that are convinced, and several of them do the micro stretching for one thing, to help them to kind of detox from studying or whatever, help them relax, help them go to sleep. But after we finish our workout, we'll get on a big high jump apron, and it usually gets nicer because the humidity drops as the sun comes up and it feels nice and cool. And we will do several mobility type stretches like Tom's talking about. Some are similar to Nico's exercise, but we don't have any pillows for heads or any pillows for supportive feet. We don't have walls right there. We got 60 guys, but we'll go through some things. And I figured out a few years ago a lot of benefits of this, and it's pretty simplistic. I'll teach them all at first. Everybody lay down, take a long, slow, deep breath in, a long, slow, deep breath out. Again, diaphragmatic breathing like you're talking about. And I'll start a clock and I'll say, when I say go, every in and out is 1. And invariably, they're all at 5 or 6 or 7. So I'll say, instead of thinking of 60 seconds of a stretch, looking at your watch, looking at your phone, or counting out loud, you take 6 long, slow, deep breaths in and out. And the combination is 1, that's how they time their exercise on each side if need be. 2, they're long, slow breathing in and out. They're relaxing the system. They're relaxing the muscles, relaxing everything. And 3, as Tom mentioned, it shuts them up. I say, hey, if you're talking, you're not breathing. And because my assistant coach looked at me, he goes, hey, you hear that? I said, what? He goes, yeah, that's what I mean. They're finally not talking. And I've coached girls, they're worse than girls in the morning. And they it's a social time. So, and we'll do that for a good, maybe 10, 12 minutes, because we'll go from exercise to exercise, which breaks it up. And then the kids know, the captains know to lead them, and they'll go through some joint mobility type work. But we also use, again, it's not micro stretching, but we kind of use Nico's principle, which it made such sense to me when I first read his stuff. Very gentle. And I talked to him about this yesterday. It's kind of the American mentality that for a workout, for stretching, if you cut your arm and you if it doesn't hurt, it must not be good. You know, if I cut my hand and I pour somebody said, here, pour this on, and it doesn't burn. Oh, well, that's not doing anything because it's not burning, as if the process of burning actually helped, you know, make it antiseptic. If you don't feel miserable and crawl the ground and throw up after the workout, it wasn't a workout. And as Tom, Malcolm, everybody knows, you know, doing a high neuromuscular workout for a sprinter jumper, that's the last thing you want. It's not that kind of training. But the same thing for stretching. So many of them is like, oh, I can feel it. Well, I mean, before I even read Nico's stuff, that just seemed to me insane because it makes the muscle contract, puts a lot of the tension on the soft tissue insertions. And there's a guy here, I think he's gone. I don't think he's here, you know, doing plank stuff for 60 and 90 seconds with like middle school age kids where it's like the shoulder, you know, it's got to be motion for one, and you hold it isometrical all the time, all that stress goes to the soft tissues, you know, but anyway, we do that for some mobility, for some cooling after, get them relaxed, they go in and they eat, they get some protein and carbs, they go to class, 3:30, they're done with the day, they go home, study, and then do their micro stretching. And, you know, do they all do that? No. But again, we can't be within 24 hours.
So, I mean, any other questions? Because I guess we're almost running out of time.
Would it be an idea if you're doing, say, a 6-day training week, making the last day before you go into a rest day, just a micro session and a breathing cycle session, just to relax, then you have 1 or 2 days off, ready to start the next week when you're in your heavy preparation phase?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're saying the day before you compete, or you're saying
the day before you rest?
Oh, the day before you rest. Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
good.
When you're in your strongest condition.
Set you up for better rest. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're totally regenerated by the time you come back 2 days later to start the next week's training.
With my high school athletes, we kind of try to do that in cross country and in track and field by, you know, Mondays, and it makes it harder to get things done depending on when next competition is. But Monday is maybe a light day. Maybe we work on some technique, but it's not a lot of heavy things, because if we compete on Saturday, then Sunday, I tell them, you know, no contact for sprinters, jumpers, hurdlers, no ground contacts. Get on an exercise bike, ride around the neighborhood, get in a pool if you've got one, get on you know, an elliptical at home, just no pounding. Do some of that lightly, relax, do some light stretching, maybe do micro stretching, you know, and then the Monday when we get back is not hammer the heck out of them. Monday is more recovery stuff and maybe some technical things when they're sharp, they're not totally fried. But, you know, it makes it hard when you compete on a Saturday and you got to compete maybe the next Saturday on the high school schedule.
But I think the one thing that you've got to keep in mind is that recovery regeneration determines everything from proper strength and conditioning development to sleep, to mental, emotional stress. I mean, for instance, in the NFL, after they play the weekend, the first 2 days, believe it or not, are totally focused on recovery. That's it. They don't do any lifting. They don't do nothing. It's all about getting those tissues that have been traumatized from the impact and trying to flush it, trying to remove as much inflammation in their bodies. That's what the focus is, you know, period. It's about dealing with inflammation, you know. But I don't know. I'd like to, I guess we got to bring this to an end. I'd like to thank Tom for his great presentation.
Yeah,
that's good.
Thank you. Huh?
You know, it was
Thanks for
really
asking me
good.
to do it.
No, thank you, and thank Richie. And now, like I said before, I think it's very, very important that you bring your questions, your queries about what is it that, because this is what I wanted this to be. I wanted it to be a level where we can sit down, like a big brainstorming session, figure out I've got a calf issue with an athlete, I've got a plantar fasciitis, what's the best way to work on it and why. But what I also try to incorporate with a lot of my stuff, and I'm glad Tom Tom took the time to present him as well. And listen, if anybody else wants to present, this would be great as well. But I had a PowerPoint presentation on scar tissue, which I will talk about next week, because I think it's very, very important that you get an idea of what scar tissue really is, because this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a lot of, scar tissue developments, the fibrotic tissue. This is what happens. And when you have fibrotic tissue in your body, it limits your ranges of motion. And here's the other thing that this is one of my biggest queries that I've had, and I'll end off on this note, is people have to look at increasing as much range of motion, but they don't. What they do is, after they come back from an injury, the focus seems to be very predominantly on strength. Try to strengthen that muscle, try to get that muscle strong again that's been injured, to the detriment of the range of motion. So if you actually strengthen the muscle and you've only got this much range of motion, you're only going to generate this much accelerated power. But if you actually increase the range of motion of that muscle through the full extent of its range of motion, then you start strengthening, and you've got more accelerated power, which is very, very important. So,
I'm on it. Perfect.
Richie, anything?
I was greeting another student. We're still doing drop-offs. And the other thing I was thinking too was, if you all are there, and thank you, I forget what you said your name was, iPhone, but you're an athlete, but maybe,
Allie.
Okay, if you have athletes of your own, get them to get on here. If you have other coaches, invite them. I put a thing on that Facebook page saying, hey, let's, get on here and join it today. And we didn't have a great big response there, but, maybe get athletes too to get on here. All right, so you're at Western Ontario.
Yes.
I'm at the University of Toronto.
I don't know if you read my chat message.
I just did.
Yeah, I went to Western.
Isn't that where Vicky Crowley the coach?
Yes, she was my coach.
Okay, but your coach now I assume speaks French or
Spanish.
Oh,
no,
Spanish.
He's in Colombia.
Oh, yeah. He's in Colombia. Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, so I finished my undergrad 2 years ago, and I decided to move back to train with him. And I'm actually training to go to Tokyo.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So you're back in Colombia now?
Yes, I am. Right now I'm in Canada because of the quarantine, but as soon as it all kind of lifts, I'll go back around maybe September, October.
We're actually trying.
Medellin?
No, Bogota.
We're actually trying to develop, we're in the midst right now of putting together a whole recovery regeneration center in Albergue Olympico in Puerto Rico.
Okay. That's where we want. There's a few good coaches from Puerto Rico who are already using your system. I don't know if you know of Ludwig. Jose Ludwig, he's Salwa Niederasser's coach, the current best 400-meter runner in the world. He uses your program.
And then we actually have Carlos Guzman with Wesley Vasquez.
Okay.
Who I've actually treated Vasquez in Puerto Rico. So we're quite excited about. Tom's excited as well and so is Jimson. We want to develop that into a international recovery regeneration center.
And when are you doing that? When are you doing
Well, I'm hoping,
maybe I'll go there.
How much money do you have to get it started?
Well, actually, Pan American Association has put money aside for the track already.
Yeah, I know. Well, we're working on NACAP, but right now everything's kind of on hold. So. And World Athletics on down.
And Ramon Alvarez, the overseer of Albergue, is actually right now in the midst of clearing out that one place that we want to put that microstretching / recovery regeneration center. But do I take students? I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto. The only way I could work with you is if you actually have a main professor that would be your supervisor, and I could be like a co-supervisor.
Okay, but would he have to be from the University of Toronto? Could he be from the?
No, he could be Western. He could be Bogota. He could be Puerto Rico. He could be anything, as long as you've got. Because if I had a distinction as an associate or assistant professor at University of Toronto, that would be different. But being an adjunct, no. But if you actually have a professor in Columbia, wherever you want, we can team up. I could be like a co-supervisor, no problem.
Okay, I love the sounds of that. Would I be able to get your email or some way of contacting you?
Yeah, sure. Microstretching@gmail.com.
I'm just putting it up right now. See if I typed correctly. Yeah, does that look right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've heard of, I really like your work and this whole topic because, I mean, after I graduated from Western, I went out to the States to study structural integration or Rolfing. I don't know if you've heard of it. So I'm a Rolfer too.
Ida Rolf's work.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm a Rolfer.
Ida Rolf's works.
So, I mean, her work is also focused on getting the central nervous system to be in the most calm state. So, I mean, it goes very hand in hand with what you're doing with the micro stretching. So I'm a fan.
Thank you. Thank you. No, we'll continue. But like I said, so these are micro stretching live sessions every Wednesday. Please bring coaches. Please bring anybody else. You know, Tom. Anything you want to say, Tom?
So, Nikos, just one thing, because what you're saying about Rolfing, there's a lot of great things you can do for recovery. Like I'm a huge fan of massage, and I'm actually a huge fan of infrared saunas. I think they're amazing. But the thing about microstretching is you need pretty much no equipment to still do this. You don't need a hands-on practitioner to do this at the very basic level. And you can give your athletes something that they can go away with a better understanding of their body, being able to do this at home with a wall and a door jamb. So it's incredibly empowering. So things like an infrared sauna is amazing, like a full hour massage is amazing. But, you know, if you can just have an athlete going, look, well, you know now, don't you? You know what your rec fem feels like. You know what your adductor feels like. You know what your lat feels like. You know what your piriformis feels like. You can go away home, you can work on that. And so it's just an incredibly powering tool, I think. It's so simple. And yeah, obviously it's better with things like pillows and stuff like that, but it can be used on a very basic level by anyone. And because you're doing things like at 30%, it's very hard to hurt yourself if you're doing it wrong.
And so there's a lot of things about microstretching as well. And like Tom's alluded to, the self-stretching. And I want to say, guys, we're not, we haven't had a meeting about a week ago say we're going to say this, that. No, this is all ad lib. But the other thing too is I use microstretching from a therapeutic point of view, which Jimson has been treated by me, and Richie's also experienced it as well when I was down in Puerto Rico. So, but the other thing I'm going to say is I'm going to be rolling out some online courses. Tom, you better sign up.
Hey, Allie, I put on there too, that link is to the drive, and it's got the article from New Studies in Athletics that has the diagrams and stuff too. So.
Oh my God, thank you.
So I'm going to be offering an online stuff as well, because I actually want to develop, and Tom's been on my case for a long time, and the same as Jimson, about teaching people how to become microstretching therapists as well. So like I had to develop Rolfing. So yeah.
You could have your own school of that too.
in Puerto Rico.
And maybe it could just grow everywhere in the world.
Definitely. Hey guys, pleasure. Let's next week it's on scar tissue, and bring your questions, bring your friends. All right? Bring athletes.
Hey Allie, what's the Colombian Federation's president's name?
Honestly, they changed president. I think it was about 2 years ago, but I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I know the vice president is called Ciro Solano. That's the vice president, but I don't know who the actual.
5-6 years ago, I can't remember his name. I can see his face. Nice. He helped me out when I was down there a lot.
It's probably Ciro.
Yeah. Okay.
Those guys never retire.